Welcome to Keith and I Don't Tread on Anyone and the Libertarian Institute. Today I'm joined by Andrew of Popular Liberty. Andrew, where is the best place to find your collection of work?
You can find me at Popular Liberty on YouTube. You can also, I have a lot of free content on my Subscribestar at subscribestar.com / popular liberty.
Today we will be reviewing and summarizing Thomas E. Woods' book, How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization, published in 2005. Andrew, what does the word Catholic mean?
Catholic means universal. It was adopted, by the church, at Antioch, not uncoincidentally. At Antioch was where they first started calling themselves Christian, and at Antioch was also where the church started calling themselves Catholic. It just means universal. Initially, it was a lowercase c, and eventually it became an uppercase C.
What differentiates Catholicism from Orthodox Christianity and Protestant Christianity?
Do you want the 5-minute view or the 20-minute explanation?
2.5 to 5 minutes, please.
We got it. All right. What differentiates the Catholics from the Orthodox? Basically, when Christianity started, there were about 5 different main centers of Christianity. Orthodox is the other 4, and Catholic is the 5th. We came from Rome, and the others were Antioch, Alexandria, Constantinople, and Jerusalem, and so they and together they all kind of ruled over Christianity and guided it into what it eventually became. And the the differences between like the Orthodox and Catholics were basically the two kind of groups, and the Roman Rite and the other Eastern rites, rites plural. And so when so we started disagreeing about what is the nature of God? Is he we couldn't agree on whether the Holy Spirit was a product of the Son or not. And there was a few other things that came along with it, but that was the main disagreement on like who is God. And and we also couldn't agree on papal authority. That's kind of that's a Catholic niche thing, but so basically in 1054 the Orthodox and the Catholic split, and and it was then later, about 500 years later, it was we got the Protestant Reformation, which has started with Martin Luther. He broke off from the Catholics, not the Orthodox, and so the Catholics, he had a bunch of problems, but he was the basic one who started the Reformation by saying, no, it's not, I don't need the church's authority to tell me how to interpret scripture. I can just read the plain meaning and interpret it myself. And that was the main disagreement that he brought to the table, and all of the other disagreements came from there. And other reformers came along after him and either reformed him or again reformed the church. But they were all based on that one view of Martin Luther said, no, it's my individual authority that allows me to interpret scripture, not the authority of my ancestors and holy tradition.
Let's get into the material. Chapter 1 is titled The Indispensable Church. Chapter 2 is titled A Light in the Darkness. These first two more or less summarize the work that he goes much more into detail in the following chapters. As far as chapter 1 goes, he sort of starts off with, whenever you hear about the Catholic Church today, it's almost always in a negative light. They go from it's important to not negatively generalize people. Also, Catholics are a bunch of idiot child rapists.
All 1.3 billion of them. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So please comment on both that idea and give me some of your biggest takeaways from chapters 1 and 2.
Chapters 1 and 2, the things what I really took away what from just how much we had this thing had really started with us. And this way, I was always taught as a Catholic, and I went to a school that, and so I knew like the history of it. I knew that, but where he started taking us in at chapter 1 and all that. It's like just the history of like, hey, we started this thing in Rome. We were persecuted for hundreds of years. It was really awful. And 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 then like the dark, of course, the republics, they ended in disaster, like all of them. And so the Roman Republic was basically ending. It was in its disaster state, and we were invaded by Europe was invaded by like evil barbarians, basically. And back then they thought, and these became the dominant rulers, and they were called the Merovingians. And when we started trying to Christianize these people, they regarded like being a mass murderer as like the highest role you could aspire to in society. Being a warrior and a conqueror. That mass murderer. And so that we started with that, and then we turned all of Europe into the Christian society that it became. And so we really started just from the ground up. I hadn't realized like how far back and uncivilized our starting point was, and that's what makes the church's mission so like miraculous, and that it worked.
Certainly. So walk me through, I should have researched this beforehand. My understanding is Peter, I shouldn't even try. Explain how Jesus gave the keys to the church to Peter, and we currently have a pope that has the legitimate papal authority that it does.
Yeah, so basically in Matthew chapter 16, verses basically 16 through 19, you get the story of when Peter, he comes to Caesarea Philippi, and he asks his disciples, who do the people say that I am? And they give him a bunch of different names, and it's Peter who pipes up and says, you are the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus turns to Peter and he says, blessed are you, Simon, son of John, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but it was my Father in heaven. This is where we get the idea that the Pope receives can receive revelation from God right there. And Jesus continues on to say that flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but it was my Father in heaven. And I say to you, Simon, son of John, your name is now Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. Peter means rock. And on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And I will give to you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Now, keys to the kingdom of heaven is actually extremely specific reference. The only other time we see it in Scripture is in Isaiah, where God is literally saying, "I'm going to make you the ruler of my kingdom, of my kingdom on earth, Israel." And it's like literally saying you're the ruler, and you're giving headship. Now you see later on that Christ does give the other apostles the power to bind and loose, but he does not give them the keys. Only the keys go to Peter. And we take this, and you will see later on, basically Peter was our first pope. So, being good, like all good popes, he, a little later on, he denies he ever met Christ 3 times in one night, details. And so you're going to see you will see something of a pattern of that all throughout church history. But, and of course, Jesus comes back and it's kind of a soft rebuttal to him, where he's like, okay, so you denied you ever met me 3 times, so he asked him 3 times, do you love me? Because obviously if the answer is yes, that means you know me. So Peter answers yes 3 times, and 3 times back Jesus says, well, feed my sheep, take care of my flock. And because he says he's the good shepherd, and now he's handing his role to Peter, like, you're now the caretaker of my flock. And so you actually see it twice in Scripture, where Peter is actually given something of a supremacy over the other apostles, because he's the only one with the keys. And we believe Peter was the one who built the church in Rome, and that this was where he stayed and died he stayed the rest of his life and died there. He also founded the one in Antioch, but he didn't stay there. And so we believe that these keys to the kingdom are what's really handed down to the popes, and it's Peter's authority that is given as that is being handed down to from pope to pope.
Yes. Okay. That was the important chain of church legitimacy that I was missing. I really enjoyed chapter 3, How the Monks Saved Civilization, page 31. Wherever they went, the monks introduced crops, industries, or production methods with which the people had not been previously familiar. Here, they would introduce the rearing of cattle and horses, and the brewing of beer, or the raising of bees or fruit. In Sweden, the corn trade owed its existence to the monks. In Parma, it was cheesemaking. In Ireland, salmon, fisheries, and in a great many places, the finest vineyards. In Lombardy, the peasants learned irrigation from the monks, which contributed mightily to making the area so well known throughout Europe for its fertility and riches. Thanks to the great network of communication that existed between the various monasteries, technical information was able to spread rapidly. Thus, we find very similar water-powered systems at monasteries that were at great distances from each other, even thousands of miles away. What were your biggest takeaways from how the monks saved civilization?
It was just, this is like one of the most important, probably the most important chapter, because this is like the biggest, piece of anti-Catholic propaganda that Catholics have to deal with, the Dark Ages. And so like all of this stuff, it happened during the, these so-called Dark Ages really were not so. And the only reason you had, and what Tom Woods really does well is he actually gives you the right explanation, because like the reason called Dark Ages is that that you had a rapid rise in illiteracy. And so, people were able to read, and then very few of them were able to. And two things are happening at this time. One of which Tom looks at in the book, which is like the major wars. You remember when we said earlier that we had to start by Christianizing the barbarians who viewed mass murder as like the big noble thing, and so we had to like Christianize those guys. But first they had to get here, and this is like the whole reason we lost literacy in the West is we got invaded by a bunch of barbarians who viewed mass murder as like the big thing you really want to do to be a moral human being. And so when that comes through, and when those guys, you have like Attila, this is the time when you have like Attila and Alaric and all of the other like savages who sacked Rome and destroyed it. We had the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths. And Rome got hit in the rear end like repeatedly. And so during this time we lost literacy, but at the same exact time we were able to keep it alive, through these monasteries, and not just keep it alive, because like when the same thing happened to ancient Greece, they lost their whole language. Like you had a whole bunch of invasions, and the back at like the kind of the turn of the Bronze Age, and they lost their whole language. They lost everything, and it took them hundreds of years to just recreate it. And so, but that didn't happen in Europe. Like we kept our language, and not only did we keep it, we expanded it. Because like the old language that we had in writing, it didn't really have like punctuation or anything like that. It didn't have capital, lowercase letters, and it made it really, really difficult to understand. And one of the things the monks did was they actually invented a much easier to use language that made literacy a whole lot easier. You could spell things with fewer characters, and you had punctuation, so you knew what people were saying and what they weren't. And that was a huge deal. And we didn't even have that I don't think they had that in Greek. And by the way, going back to the Eastern Orthodox, that was another problem that we had, was that they spoke Greek, we spoke Latin, and it was really difficult, and we had a whole bunch of mistranslations between each other that ended up with us like excommunicating the other, all because of like simple definition stuff where they said, oh, they wrote to us saying, no, we only venerate Mary, just like you guys do, but they mistranslated it as worship, which is like, oh, that's a heresy now, because we only worship God. And so anyway, we ended up excommunicating them for that out of a misunderstanding, and that had all this political ramifications. But anyway, but it was the monks who really kept all of that alive to begin with at all, because otherwise we would just completely lost it. We wouldn't have been able to excommunicate those schismatic effers. We went to the schismatics.
Woods goes on to discuss just so many things in here. The Father Francisco Lana Seri, Terzi, he says being the father of aviation. He discusses geometry and the flying of physical vessels. He discusses clockmaking, which is able to accurately predict lunar eclipses. He discusses charitable works on page 38, saying, all according to this rule, the rule at the monasteries among the monks, all guests who come shall be received as though they were Christ. The door of the monastery is always open to all, and that its bread is free to the whole world. Here was the Spirit of Christ at work, giving shelter and comfort to strangers of all kinds. To other monastic libraries and scriptoria, the rooms set aside for the copying of texts, that we owe the great bulk of ancient Latin literature that survives today. When these works weren't saved and transcribed by the monks, we owe their survival to the libraries and schools associated with the great medieval cathedrals. Thus, when the church was not making original contributions of her own, she was preserving books and documents that were of seminal importance to civilization she was to save. The church cherished, preserved, studied, and taught the works of the ancients, which would otherwise have been lost. I got one final one here. He summarized it at the end. Without study and without books, said a monk of Muri, the life of a monk is nothing. Our books are our delight, and our wealth in time of peace, our offensive and defensive arms in time of war, our food when we are hungry, and our medicine when we are sick. Western civilization's admiration for the written word and for the classics comes to us from the Catholic Church that preserved both through the barbarian invasions. Any final thoughts on how the monks saved civilization?
No. I think we should move on.
Chapter 4, the church and the university. Oh, this one's a little bittersweet.
It worked a lot better. Oh, actually, let me do. I do have one thing to say on how they saved civilization. That one thing that they had, which worked out really, really well, is that they were able to start making it normal for rulers to be educated. Remember, they're coming in with barbarians and and all they believe in is killing, but now they're going to be actual rulers instead of being nomads who go place to place. They're actually going to plop down and rule and set up shop and become the good states that we love today. Nah, I'm kidding. And we had to one of the things the church did through these monasteries was that they would offer to educate the rulers. And that made the rulers very, very friendly to Christianity. One, because hey, it's our teachers that are educating them, so of course we're gonna tell them, hey, the whole mass murder thing, we should really stop that. And like, oh, I never thought of it that way. And but there was one story of a king, one of the King Otto of Germany, and he was really really far back or something like that. Not Germany, might have been King of Gaul back then. He's somewhere in Gaul, and he writes to a famous monk who would later go on to become priest that, hey, I'm thoroughly a brute. My education has been sorely lacking. This math book you sent me is really, really interesting. Will you please come teach me to do math and about the works of my ancestors, because he was half Greek and it wasn't fully Gaul, but anyway, so we started educating rulers, and so when we had better rulers who were less savage, it not only did that save civilization, it prospered it, because we didn't have that before. This is how when our rulers became more civilized, everybody else followed. It seems like that was the major innovation that gave us, okay, we're not killing each other to see who gets to have the sandwich, which is what our life would have been like. So if that had never happened.
Chapter 4, the church and the university. Wood says on page 47, the university was an utterly new phenomenon in European history. Nothing like it had existed in ancient Greece or Rome. The institution that we recognize today, with its faculties, courses of study, examinations, and degrees, as well as the distinction between undergraduate and graduate study, comes to us directly from the medieval world. The church developed the university system because, according to historian Lowry Dolly, it was the only institution in Europe that showed consistent interest in the preservation and cultivation of knowledge. Thoughts on chapter 4?
This is a bittersweet thing, because one of the things that you really this is like probably one of the biggest innovations. Like, besides the monasteries, the universities are basically the second way that the Catholic Church like really built civilization. Like, these are the two main institutions that just did it all. And what it used to be was that, hey, particularly when we were inventing the scientific method and all of that, like, this was largely done at the universities. And so we would be we'll get to that in I think the next chapter, but the main way that that this was done was you were always guided ethically, in the kind of research you did. Like, we didn't have this like gender studies BS, or we didn't have critical race theory being taught, because we actually had morals and ethics guiding the whole teaching process. So you wouldn't have all of the university problems that we have today. That was something that developed much later. But but when you notice that, hey, scientific progress has basically halted. I don't think it's a coincidence. And and this was the institution that really it started off kind of rough because the people didn't really like the young kids that coming through and being basically college kids, except which is. Yeah, even back in the day, college kids were college kids, but they still enjoyed the money and all that. But this gave us the whole ruling class that we have today. That I know it's gonna make you think, I don't know about that, Andrew, but trust me, they're way better today than they used to be. They're far more civilized, a bunch of mass murderers than the previous ones.
Next chapter, 5, the church and science. Woods really puts a lot of weight on a book, Wisdom 11:21, in which God is said to have, quote, ordered all things by measure, number, and weight. This point, according to Yaki, a separate researcher, not only lent support to Christians in late antiquity who held up the rationality of the universe, but also inspired Christians a millennium later who, at the beginnings of modern science, had embarked on quantitative inquiry as a way of understanding the universe. This point may appear so obvious as to be of little interest, but the idea of a rational, orderly universe, enormously fruitful and indeed indispensable for the progress of science, has eluded entire civilizations. In response to polytheists, he says, they conceive the universe as a huge organism dominated by a pantheon of deities, and destined to go through endless cycles of birth, death, rebirth. This made the development of science impossible. It characterized ancient cultures which conceived of the divine as immanent in created things, hindered the growth of science by making the idea of constant natural laws foreign. Created things had minds and wills of their own, an idea that all but precluded the possibility of thinking of them as behaving according to regular, fixed patterns. He cites Roger Bacon, who said, without experiment, nothing can be adequately known. He also says, if you have something like the Islamic belief system, which says that Muhammad or Allah is so powerful that in order to recognize the universe as having any constants in it, is to sort of limit God. And this is what he says gave sort of a stillbirth, terrible term, but that's what he uses, to any scientific progress in the Islamic nation, usually around the modern day Iraq. He says that is the reason that it took off in the Catholic Church, them trying to understand the world that God built, whereas Muslims saw this sort of as heresy, in the sense of, don't tell me objects always fall at this. What you're saying is you're limiting God, as opposed to the Catholics who saw it as understanding God's creation. Thoughts on the
so many
remaining
thoughts here.
Yeah, chapter 5, the church and science.
Yeah, I think this is a thing I've been really exploring lately too, is that why is it that your concept of God determines your entire society? And you will notice this as well, that whenever before you get a regime change from like a monarchy to a republic, or a republic to a monarchy, or something to something, you always in history have a religious change that precedes it. Whenever it happens naturally, when it happens by conquest, okay, but you still get a religious change with it, though, usually. But like when Rome was going from a republic and turning into the European monarchies, what the religious change was Christianity. I mean, they had paganism before that, and when you have you fast forward to the Reformation, what was it that precipitated true absolute monarchies going into the constitutional monarchies and republics? It was the Reformation. That basically all of liberalism is Protestantism. And even in the 19th and 20th centuries, when we were going from progressivism to we were going from the constitutionalism to progressivism as our system of government here in America, what happened? It was the social gospel. Basically it was that social gospel that taught that the rich man the Christian rich man is supposed to be the one, is supposed to give all of his money away to the poor and all that, and we should have a government that assists in doing all of this. It was that religious change that that every time moves it forward. And so when we had this scientific revolution, it's you can't not trace that back to the Catholic change that happened, where we changed over from paganism, which as Keith just read in that part, does not give you a universe that is stable, or it doesn't give you an orderly universe. The only reason you would study how the world works is if you believed it worked that way, the same way all the time. And only the Catholic concept of God gives you that. The difference we have with Eastern Orthodoxy is kind of goes straight to that. This is the reason why they're big on mysticism and all and spirituality, instead of civilization and scientific progress and all that, because they kind of reject some key pieces of order in God. They think some of it's just a mystery and we don't know how it works, and we accept that as a part of our faith. And whereas Catholics would be like, no, God has pure reason and all of that. And that's why we believe that that the universe works the same way all the time. And we don't believe in animism. We don't believe that your iPhone has a mind of its own, or yet. But and so because of this is how you get sustained scientific inquiry. Whereas other places you will get something of a technological development, but that's very different than just asking questions about how this works. Whereas I'm not asking, I'm asking these questions so I can understand it, not so that I can, just make a technological improvement or something like that. Scientific inquiry is not just Christian, it's Catholic. And and so it's especially Catholic. That's why it was invented in the Catholic West and not the Orthodox East. And it's also why it's kind of gone to hell in a handbasket, and under these hyper progressives. I'm sorry, hyper Protestants. Progressives. That the reformers never stopped reforming. They kind of just reformed Christ right out of the church. That's how we got the progressives, like atheists. I also call them Protestants because this is how they were invented, and they're going to hate hearing that I view them as a sect of Protestantism. You're one of the 37,000 and counting. But when you make but when you put that kind of emphasis on the self, that yourself is the authority of truth in Scripture, it's like, well, okay, you just made him the authority in all truth. And this is why we say science is now my experience of it, and this is how you get math is racist. It's like when these like radical nut jobs, and they really are nut jobs, and they're like, when they say like math is racist and all this stuff, we should view that as an extension of Martin Luther saying, I'm the authority on Scripture, because I'm the authority of truth. It's my truth. And when they all disagree, and they think I'm all right. I'm reading the plain. I'm experiencing this, and I'm giving you the plain word. I'm giving you the plain explanation of the Bible, and there's no thought that maybe your experience is wrong, and maybe you didn't learn the right thing. And so and by the way, this is where we got the actual scientific method was, your experience might be wrong. How about we have a verification mechanism, that you actually test your hypothesis and you empirically observe, and then other people repeat the process and say what they observed. And that's how the scientific method works, where there's a verification mechanism now for how we're going to view reality and how we're going to make theories about how it works. And and this is why it's science is explicitly Catholic in that sort of sense, that it's not you are not the sole authority of truth. It's like it takes other people to verify truth for you.
Yeah, and you definitely get this lack of humility in the scientism cult that currently exists. They're so sure about their plans for other people. Yeah, that they're so sure that they're going to mandate them. They're not going to let you choose. They're not going to try and debate with you. They're going to call you names. You had mentioned the concept of critical race theory earlier. That almost explicitly says, which James Lindsay defines as calling something racist until it's under your control. Yeah. Well, when the goal is control, as opposed to understanding God, understanding truth, understanding logos, reason, or the universe, you start with the conclusion. It's specifically in this. They will say, we know that the people and the institutions in the West are sexist and racist. The question is, can we find it? So it's not even, let's define the term and see if it applies. We know it applies. We don't have humility. We don't have a scientific method. So this is
the presuppositional argument for God, by the way.
Backwards. Yeah. Well, just briefly, I want to summarize the findings on page. He actually summarized it on page 4. This chapter. Wood says, for the last 50 years, virtually all historians of science have concluded that the scientific revolution was indebted to the church. The Catholic contribution to science went well beyond ideas, including theological ideas, to accomplished practicing scientists, many of them who were priests. For example, Father Nicholas Steno, a Lutheran convert who became a Catholic priest, is often identified as the father of geology. The father of Egyptology was Father Athenaeus Kircher. The first person to measure the rate of acceleration of a freely falling body was yet another priest, Father Gambashida Recolai. I'm sorry about these names, but that's why I say the
You're butchering them better than I would have. So.
That's why I say the page number so people can check below. Father Roger Boskovic is often credited as the father of modern atomic theory. Jesuits so dominated the study of earthquake that seismology became known as the Jesuit science. And that is far from all. Even some 35 craters on the moon are named for Jesuit scientists and mathematicians. The church's contributions to astronomy are all but unknown to the average educated American. Final thoughts on the church and science, chapter 5.
Oh yeah, it's if you look at that, this is why they just mentioned it, that basically all of the founding fathers of the scientific disciplines are Catholics, and not just Catholics, they're monks and priests. And
yeah, exactly. They're not Catholic by coincidence or happenstance.
yeah, these are people who have like they've either had some sort of soft ordination or some real ordination, which is the act of becoming priest. You gotta become a monk, which is kind of a soft ordination where you have to live the lifestyle, but get to do the mass. And anyway, it's just we always get we're going to talk about Galileo in a bit, I think, but basically, whenever we hear like the Catholic Church and science, it's only Galileo that they talk about. They don't talk about how all of the other like founding fathers and all of the earliest scientists were Catholics. And and like this is something that you don't get in other cultures. This is the only place we've had it, and to the extent we've become less Catholic is basically the extent we've really lost it. We've lost that drive to understand reality. Again, to love is to know. He who loves is born of God and knows God. The word there in Greek for know is like by experience. It's like I can experience God by love. And so this idea that this is where again it goes back to what is your concept of love? The Catholic concept of God. I mean, it's like it goes back to your concept of God, how your civilization turns out. Our Catholic concept of God is that God is love, and love has very particular properties in this sense where it's a reciprocated agape. And when that's the selfless kind of love, and it's reciprocated selflessness perfectly. And the magic of this in the early church fathers, where they are the ones who figured this out, St. Augustine particularly, where they say that this is what actually produces that those fruits of the Spirit that we hear about. I think it's in Ephesians, where he says that, hey, the fruit of the Spirit, which is love, is itself love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. We got from that, that, love is productive. Love produces good things. And that's one of the necessary qualities of, what distinguishes real love from false love. And so when we got this idea that to love one another, to love our neighbors as ourselves, means we need to be productive for them, and this is where we got this idea that we should be actually producing good things through civilization. It's not enough to just love. I love you is not a feeling; it's an action of doing goodness to other people, and this is how we come to know these things. So this is where we get this, hey, we should be producing knowledge that helps our, build our civilization for our people. It helps do good for the community. Like they said about the monks earlier, that they would always try to solve the problems of whatever community was, of whatever community they were a part of, where it's like, hey, how can we make this production process for cheese better? And the monks would figure it out, and they would do it without being paid. There was this selfless love that that the Catholics viewed as their definition of God. This was what actually built civilization, because it was this idea that we worship. And that we're sacrificing to. To worship means to sacrifice. That's what's different than veneration. Like Catholics don't worship Mary because we don't offer her any sacrifices, and we only offer sacrifices to God. And so, so this idea that we sacrifice to, that we, that we be selfless for, because to sacrifice is to be selfless. This is the idea of why one is worshiping and the other is not, is because, our idea of selfless love is also the idea of worshiping God, that we have to be selfless and, in order to be like him. This thing that we worship necessarily, that means, hey, we're doing good to other people. So so this is, that this thing that we worship is actually the action of doing good to other people and producing new things that didn't before. And you see this also in capitalism. That the idea. Okay, how do you, Keith? How do you create value? New value.
New value would be something that exists in the mind of someone else. So it would involve me creating something that someone else valued and offering them a voluntary exchange.
Exactly. And so that's exactly right. So you have value that's traded for value voluntarily, and that creates new value ex nihilo. That's how God created it. This is why we say love created the universe, because love is necessarily productive. That the Father loves the Son, and the Son reciprocates his Father. That love infinitely is what gives us the infinite, the new value itself of the Holy Spirit. So we can actually get our property rights theory from libertarianism through this idea of love, because in order for it to be real love, it has to be chosen fully. That means you have to fully own yourself, you have to have persons in order to do that, and not and then going back to this idea of, hey, we traded that you exchange good for good, value for value, and that creates new value. This is where we get the Holy Spirit from, who is the bond of love. This is why we say the fruit of the Spirit, it's who is love, is also itself love. Love has that fractal relationship. And so this underlies capitalism. Why is it we're able to go from rubbing sticks together to create fire to talking on Skype? Is because this idea of Catholic love is also what underlies capitalism. It underlies science, and it underlies how we built civilization, or I should say how the monks built civilization, and their relationship with science was that the purpose of science is to better know and love your neighbor as yourself. It's to follow that greatest commandment that Christ gave us, and it's all intertwined. I know I'm not going to be like that Scott Horton thing where, that shirt with all the red, that. He's got like the conspiracy wall.
Yeah. As far as the Galileo case, that has been done to death so often. And basically, Wood summarizes it as, I didn't even underline anything, that his dispute with the church was not that they wouldn't let him teach. He was widely recognized by popes as being a legitimate scientist. The dispute was whether or not his teachings could be taught as objective truth rather than as a working theory. And that's where the dispute came down. Do you have any comments on the Galileo case or even Copernicus? I even forgot to underline.
Oh yeah, I mean, with Copernicus, it's like the guy who first came up with the idea that it's not that the sun and the planets go around the Earth, and the Earth is the center of the universe. It's that the Earth goes around. That the Earth and the planets go around the sun. Copernicus was a Catholic priest in Poland who came up with that, and and when he did, he was like, it was Catholic cardinals who pushed him to publish it because it was such a revolutionary and good idea. He didn't want to do it initially. He had to be like pushed into it by friends, family, and eventually his own cardinal of the Catholic Church. But he was like saying, hey, this is just a hypothesis. It seems to work way better than the Ptolemaic model, which we just referred to, the geocentric model. And so eventually Galileo is the one who really gets around to proving it, and he's ready to teach it as this is exactly correct. And the problem is, he said it would require us to really reinterpret Scripture. Some places in Scripture that do seem to teach that the Earth goes around, or the sun goes around the Earth, and all of that, and it would require us to rethink all of that, that was where he kind of overstepped, because now he's talking about theology, which is not his jurisdiction, basically. And so that was what got him into trouble. But and also he's like, he really should have waited until we went around until we actually like got satellites up there and could actually see everything and realize it. But that was when we actually empirically verify it for another 500-ish years. So, but he was able to effectively prove it, and we should have been a lot more understanding back then, but we weren't. Oops. But hey, we also invented science and all of the rest of them as well, and we didn't have any other problems. So
Chapter 6 I loved because I took a humanities course in high school, and the whole agreement was if you did well in the class, you got the chance to go to Europe, and in Europe you could drink at age 18. So that's the only reason we all wanted to go. So we get there, and there's a lot of mandatory museum visits, which you sort of just schlep through so you can get to the drinking and partying at night. And oh my God, did I learn an appreciation for art, architecture, and the church, which is the title of chapter 6. Oh my gosh. I thought the malls of Arizona were fun to be around. The Calling of St. Matthew painting alone. We just stood there for like 30 minutes staring at this thing in Italy. We saw Bernini's David, or Michelangelo's David. We saw the Sistine Chapel. All of these cathedrals, you're just walking around. You can buy yourself a drink and then just walk around, and you're walking in and you're like, what cathedral is that? It's so beautiful. And they go, well, we're not really sure. That wasn't on our list here. That's how many there are. These buildings are centuries old. You just touch them and you go, God, there's so much history. I really loved the pictures. Not to mention the cover of this book is gorgeous. Yeah. But the buildings and the art in but on page 96, he shows a lot of the beautiful paintings and architecture. Michelangelo's famous Pieta, monks tending to the sick in these first hospitals, Galileo's drawings. It's absolutely unbelievable. I'll let you comment in a second here. I just want to say the opening here in chapter 6. The very fact that we possess many of our artistic masterpieces at all is itself a reflection of Catholic ideas. The 8th and 9th centuries witnessed the growth of a destructive heresy called iconoclasm. Iconoclasm rejected, am I saying that right?
Yes, you are.
Rejected the veneration of images or icons of religious figures. Indeed, iconoclasm went so far as to reject the depiction of Christ and the saints in art at all. Had that idea taken hold, the beautiful paintings, sculptures, mosaics, stained glass, illuminated manuscripts, and cathedrals that have delighted and inspired Westerners and non-Westerners alike would never have come into existence. But it could not take hold, since it ran directly counter to the Catholic understanding of and appreciation for the created world. Andrew, thoughts on chapter 6, art, architecture, and the church?
Again, like what I was saying earlier, that our disagreements about who God is and how he works with the Eastern Orthodox was, the reason why we had all of the beautiful art, and theirs ended up that was left over from Rome ended up getting burned, but the reason for it is, like, when we say, hey, love creates love, the fruit of the Spirit, that is love, creates itself love and joy. Joy is where we get beauty from. That's why we say to be perfectly beautiful is to be God, and that because God is perfectly beautiful, and this idea that we should get rid of beauty, that we should be getting rid of art, that somehow that would be sacrilegious to God. That to us was inconsistent with our idea of love, because love is beautiful, obviously, and there's like no denying that. And so we say that our concept that God is love led us to the idea that we should be creating beautiful things, and like, as a civilization, that was what I tweeted this out a while ago, that just with pictures of how beautiful these cathedrals and these palaces and these art pieces of art are in Europe, and I tweeted out, like, this is one of the things I regret most that we've lost as a civilization, this level of celestial beauty that you can't that you can just look around and it immediately inspires you to believe in God, because something like this is so beautiful. It's that level of beauty that naturally elevates your consciousness, elevates your thinking to be more like your creator. And that you would take that for that to be taken away from us, and for us to now have these concrete buildings that are just awful looking, and that they kind of make you they give you a city person's mindset, basically, to where things are not beautiful, they're just functional, and they're so mundane, and they just remind you of humanity, and they don't make you think this of any sort of beautiful reality. There's nothing beautiful. It's all just depressing. And whereas if you're just if you walk around and all you see is simply beauty, it reminds you of God and it's inspiring. That's just something I've really regret that we've lost as a civilization. And again, it starts here with the Catholic Church saying to the Easterners, no, beauty is good, beauty is of God, and we should be in order to be moral and good, we have to have these holy icons as part of our religious experience, because is the beauty of these things that elevates your consciousness to God. That beauty is of love, and there's no sin in love, as Paul says in Romans.
Next chapter, the origins of international law. Now, immediately people think of the United Nations. Not the concept at all that we're dealing with here.
Oh, God.
He defines the term on page 149. Thus far, we have spoken of the early development of international law, a norm governing the behavior of states toward each other. So in other words, it's not just it's wrong for that group to kill us. It's wrong for us to kill that group, seeing other people
really big innovation.
That's sadly a big
that
one.
Was not normal throughout all of human history. 10,500 years prior to this was not the case. It's like it seems so obvious now that I don't have the right to kill you. I love when atheists are like, it's like, you need a God to tell you that killing other people is wrong. Like, yes. Like, this was not obvious for all of human history. It's like this was
sanctimonious
a very big distinction. It's like I can tell immediately. Even going up to the 20th century, this was not a normal thing. It's a very, very, not only is it a explicitly Christian development, it is it's a very, very recent one too.
Exactly. Yeah, they go, you need a God to tell you not to kill. By the way, if you don't obey these arbitrary laws, you should more or less be killed if you try resisting them. It's okay. Well, it turns out you don't even appreciate the principle you claim.
Well, I can tell you're historically illiterate immediately when they say that.
Exactly.
It's like,
exactly.
I judge people's I judge people precisely on how pessimistic their view of human nature is, and that tells me exactly how historically literate they are. The more historically literate you are, the more you're like, oh God, we need a God to save us. This is not going to work. How did we manage this?
That's got to be a great litmus test. Just go up to someone and just give them that line. Well, we don't need a God to tell us this stuff, and just see how they respond. And that's who you can tell who you're.
You can tell immediately they're historically illiterate, because in fact we did, and it was really, really tough.
So because this was one of my favorite chapters, I'm going to try not to go on too long, but I just really enjoyed this one.
No, go on. I love it.
Page 137, he begins in December of 1511 on the island of Hispaniola, which is now Haiti and the Dominican Republic. He cites a text, I Am a Voice Crying in the Wilderness by Antonio de Montesinos. Quote, in order to make your sins against the Indians known to you, I have come up on this pulpit, I, who am a voice of Christ crying in the wilderness of this land, and therefore it behooves you to listen, not with careless intention, but with all your heart and senses, so that you may hear it. For this is going to be the strangest voice you have ever heard, the hardest and harshest and most awful and most dangerous you have ever expected to hear. This voice says that you are in mortal sin, that you live and die in it for the cruelty and tyranny you use in dealing with these innocent people. Tell me, by what right or justice do you keep these Indians in such a cruel and horrible servitude? On what authority have you waged a detestable war against these people who dealt quietly and peacefully in their own land? Why do you keep them so oppressed and weary, not giving them enough to eat or taking care of them in their illness? For with the excessive work you demand of them, they fall ill and die, or rather, you kill them with your desire to extract and acquire gold every day. And what care do you take that they should be instructed in religion? Are these not men? Have they not rational souls? Are you not bound to love them as you love yourselves? Be certain that in such a state as this, you can no more be saved than the Moors or Turks. He goes on to quote Father Francisco de Victoria, the father of international law. He says Victoria defended the doctrine that all men are equally free on the basis of natural liberty. They proclaimed their right to life, to culture, and to property around the year 1483. And I think there was one more, Father Lacassus. He also quotes a number of times. In 1550, one scholar calls Lacassus the clearest instance of an imperial power openly questioning the legitimacy of its rights and the ethical basis of its political actions. So it's not that the norm is don't kill. The norm is kill,
Yes.
and this is a deviation from the norm. So it's
Yes.
you're not trendy or cool to say, well, they also committed atrocities. Yes, that is a constant throughout. What is unique is this origin of international law brought to us by Lacassus and the Catholic Church. I think
what's common to all is the is. What's distinct is the ought.
Exactly.
It's like,
Final thoughts on Chapter 7, the origins of international law.
oh, this goes back even further than I'm not sure if he talked about it in this book, but I know this from my other historical studies that what really helped stop the wars in Europe was basically the Pope acting as mediator between all of the kings. And this and the reason the Pope became so incredibly powerful, this was one of the this is what gave us an actual international law, was that you had a very powerful bishop. The reason why he was so much more powerful is that what had happened a lot with, it still happens to this day with the Orthodox, but also used to happen a lot to the Catholics in the past, was that the bishops would be the one to appoint the other bishops, and so because the bishops are kind of small, they don't have that much headship, and they can be easily coerced, and what would happen a lot is what's called Caesaropapism, which is where the Caesar, the state, would start appointing bishops to the church. And as the Catholic Church, we adapted our way out of that by saying, okay, so it's not going to be the bishops who appoint other bishops anymore. It's going to be the Pope who appoints all the bishops. And so all of them have to yield their authority to Rome. And this was the idea of apostolic succession, is that you yielded authority on matters of church, church and state and all that, to your superior. So if all of them have this one superior in Rome, he's basically the all-powerful guy. He becomes automatically an international figure, and he's able to mediate and be an arbiter between the warring states. And this is how we solved wars quite a lot of the time, was we could appeal to the Pope and say, hey, this other ruler, he needs to spend all eternity in hell and be excommunicated, because he's doing something wrong in his war or something like that. And that worked for a lot of the time. And and you see this, by the way, right here, the reason why most of South America speaks Spanish instead of Portugal actually goes back to when the Pope played mediator between Spain and Portugal to see where their territories ended and where they didn't. This is why you get a lot more Portuguese in like Africa and Asia, and not the Americas. It's because the Pope was having an arbitration between the King of Spain and the King of Portugal of who should have the right to have all of the America claim for the king. Remember when Spanish, or I should say Columbus, claimed Hispaniola for Spain, and they were arguing, well, no, he should be Portuguese because he was for some legal reason. But anyway, the Pope ended up playing arbiter there, and he said, okay, the dividing line is going to be right here. And he got it wrong the first time, so they went back again to say, oh no, it really should be much further east, or I should say much further west. And this is why Brazil speaks Portuguese, because Brazil was to the west of that, or to the east of that line, which was the half of the world that was given to Portugal. The other half of the world, which contained all of the Americas, was given to Spain. And so basically all of everywhere except Brazil speaks Spanish, and Brazil speaks Portuguese, because the Pope was the international lawyer for all of the kings, basically.
Chapter 8, the Church and Economics. Economics is loosely defined as the study of the use of scarce resources that have alternative uses, In this chapter, he discusses Jean Buridan, 1300 to 1358, in his research on money that emerged not by government decree, but out of the process of voluntary exchange. This widely desired commodity, wherever it is, may be, and or rather must, therefore, first be valued for its role in satisfying non-monetary wants. It has to be portable, divisible, durable. He discusses Nicholas Orsom. He discusses Gersham's law. He discusses inflation. It enriches the government at the expense of the people. And there's so many. I'd have to say my favorite thing in this chapter, there is one line on subjective value. Francisco.
Yes. You went
yeah.
to the same one I did.
Among the most monumentous and important economic principles that developed and matured with the help of the late scholastics, as well as under their immediate predecessors, was the subjective theory of value. Inspired partly by their own analysis and partly by St. Augustine's comments on value in his City of God, these Catholic thinkers contended that value derived not from objective factors like cost of production or the amount of labor, but from subjective valuations of individuals. Any theory that attributed value to objective factors such as labor or other cost production was therefore faulty. He discusses Prairie of Jean Olive, 1248 to 1298, first proposed a value theory based on subjective utility. He argued that in economic terms, the value of a good derived from individual subjective assessments of its usefulness and desirability to them. Quoting Louis Savaria de la Calle, why should a bale of linen brought overland from Brittany at great expense be worth more than one which was transported cheaply by sea? Why should a book written out of hand be worth more than one which is printed, when the latter is better, though it costs less to produce? The just price is found not by counting the cost, but by the common estimation. So many gems in this. Biggest takeaways from the Church and Economics, Chapter 8.
I mean, this is like one of the biggest innovations in human history. Like, like I said, when we're, the idea that, hey, trading value for value creates new value. And this is what underlies capitalism. Capitalism is literally the spitting image of love your neighbor as yourself. And, this theory right here on how prices work. There's one quote in here I want to read by Cardinal Juan de Lugo in the 16th century. He says, price fluctuates not because of the intrinsic and substantial perfections of the articles, since mice are more perfect than corn and yet worth less, and but on account of their utility in respect to human need. This again goes right back to our concept of human love, that we're trying to satisfy human need, and it's the the idea of their subjective utility that something has to satisfying human needs that is what makes it valuable. And this is so capitalism literally is like I should say, particularly in the Austrian sense, which really accepts the subjective theory of value, this idea is, what we mean by, hey, love your neighbor as yourself, means to have quite a lot more free market capitalism that is free from aggression, because again, love cannot be forced. That's something key, is that it has to be voluntarily given, or it's not love. It's not, and so, this idea of Catholic love is what underlies our entire economic system now. And that it exists to satisfy humans' needs, and this is good. This is of God. This is of His nature. This is His of His ways. And when you're and that's why it creates new value ex nihilo, the same way God created the whole universe ex nihilo.
Yeah, I love hearing about the corn jewel paradox, because we're so used to the diamond water paradox of a couple centuries later. But it makes total sense that when you look at the life of monks who would sort of, or these Christians who would more or less embrace poverty because they sought more value there than in any what people would more or less call productive endeavors. Just that recognition that, you're not necessarily increasing GDP when you go and teach people for free. So what? Value is subjective. So that alone takes away this fake econ theory of, GDP and the velocity of money and the importance of the Keynesian multiplier effect. You realize that it's all trash once you embrace the Catholic contributions to the field of economics.
Exactly. It's about satisfying human needs because this is what love does. And so if you're not doing that, so if you're not satisfying human needs or you're actually hurting them, that's what makes it sin. Okay, go ahead.
Chapter 9, How Catholic Charity Changed the World. I love this because it's like, I knew that there were all these St. Jude hospitals and all these places and St. Mary's Food Bank. It's like I knew it, but I never sat back and processed, okay, why is that? You would think.
Love your neighbor as yourself. There it goes. There it is again.
On page 174, Wood says, the spirit of Catholic charity did not arise in a vacuum, but took its inspiration from the teaching of Christ. A new commandment I give unto you, that you should love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this, all men shall know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. He continues on page 178, discussing the early hospitals and Knights of St. John. Institutions staffed by physicians who made diagnoses and prescribed remedies, and where nursing provisions were also available, the church appears to have pioneered. A woman named Fabiola, in an act of Christian penance, established the first large public hospital in Rome. So many contributions in this arena. I think that is all. Oh, yeah, he says, page 181, the hospital's mission became more specifically defined as the care of the sick, as opposed to providing shelter to needy travelers. At first, an institution solely for Christians, the Hospital of St. John began to admit Muslims and Jews as well. So not having this exclusionary principle was another unique contribution of the Catholic charities. Anything on how Catholic charity changed the world?
Oh yeah, I mean, this was a big step in in Christianity becoming legalized, because and not just legalized, becoming like really the dominant religion of Europe. Because what would happen is you would have a whole bunch of plagues that would every now and then that would sweep through and kill a whole lot of people. And what happened that was so different, it was that the Catholics at that time was instead of because we had started making all of these hospitals. The way it started was these plagues would sweep through, and the Catholics would instead of what normal people would do is if your family member got infected or whatever, you would throw them out on the street and you never saw them again, and they would just die alone. It was a horrible way to die. And the Catholics would believing that, hey, Christ told us we need to go take care of the sick, and we're under orders, and so they would start going and gathering these people, these really sick people with plague that was going to kill them, and they would take care of them. And as it turned out, they survived a lot more. Turns out when you don't throw the people out on the streets and you actually take care of them instead of like abandoning them, you get a lot more survivors and a lot more converts. And because they took care of people, a lot more people became converted to Christianity and wanted to serve the Lord Jesus Christ. And it was this act of selfless love of, I'm going to endanger myself to take care of you, a stranger, and if you die, I'm going to be the one to bury you because your family wouldn't touch you. And that kind of selfless love was what said, something, these guys are different. And maybe their God really is someone I should serve if they're doing something this beautiful, this sacred, this selfless, for other people who are not their family. Again, this idea you would do anything good for anybody who wasn't your family or like someone you depended on for something, was just completely out of the question. No one had ever thought that, before, at least not, that was not a normal thought process back then. And that it's so normal, and so normal now is just completely yeah, I mean, it's a miracle. And so that, this Catholic idea of charity and setting up hospitals was what, gave Christianity just major adoption across the world, because it was so different, and you would not see it.
Yeah, well, Woods simply describes it as the concept of giving without reciprocity.
Yes.
He said that this is just so vitally new. He says even if you look at the Stoic philosophers, they would more or less not have this appreciation for the sanctity of human life that the church has in so many other aspects. So when someone dies, the Stoic says it's really important to not put so much of your heart into things, because you end up getting let down. Whereas the Catholic approach was, you're going to get let down. We are in a fallen world. But to ignore those human emotions is to more or less turn yourself into a rock or a beast. In one sense, you have a rock that feels nothing, or a beast that every single thing is just totally emotional and you don't use any rationality. So he says this is a drastic increase from the Greek and Roman approaches to helping people in need. He quotes a number of Stoics here.
I love that. I love it. He's so correct. Again, it goes right back to the very unique Catholic definition of love. That, hey, I'm going to, love you selflessly because this is good. This is of God. And I'm going to put this is supposed to bring me joy. Joy is that good feeling that love gives you. When people kind of mistake love for an emotion, they're really mistaking joy for love. Joy is the product. That's that good feeling you get when you're like, oh, I love you. And it's a very, very good thing. And when it's in that context of love. And okay.
A couple more on page 186. In every district, according to one scholar, alike on towering mountain and in lowly valley arose monasteries, which formed the centers of the organized religious life of the neighborhood. They maintained schools, provided models for agriculture, industry, and forestry, sheltered the traveler, relieved the poor, reared the orphans, cared for the sick, and were havens of refuge for all who were weighed down by spiritual or corporal misery. For centuries, they were the centers of all religious, charitable, and cultural activity. So there's your answer. Without the state, who would take care of the poor? The Catholic Church and those motivated by the monasterial contributions.
They will know we are Christians by our love.
I love how he actually takes an empirical example on 187. In November 1789, the revolutionary French government nationalized, that is, confiscated, church property. The archbishop warned that such an act of theft threatened educational and welfare provisions for the French people. He was right, of course. In 1847, France had 47% fewer hospitals than in the year of confiscation. And in 1799, the 50,000 students enrolled in universities 10 years earlier had dwindled to a mere 12,000. So this is where we get so many of these educational institutions that have such great capacity to teach knowledge. Of course, today they're a terrible mechanism beating us over the head. The point is that we really have the capacity to do something good here if we appreciate the things that the church has given to us.
Well, it's also that idea right there that, hey, when you cut, if Christ is the life and there's a real life in the church, to love is to live, but life comes from love. What happened when these institutions were all cut off from the love of the Catholic Church? A whole lot of them died. And because that's death right there. That's institutional death. They were what's the start? Anyway, I won't go down that path. But this again, it's like this. It goes back to this idea of what kind of God do you worship? We worship a God that is love, that is tri-personal for that reason. And if you are cut off from it, that necessarily means to die. Hey, the wages of sin is death. Because anything that's not love is sin. Basically, sin is an archery term, means to miss the mark. Well, it's like, well, what's the mark? The mark is love. And like that's the if you miss it, that's what we call sin. That is what missing the mark it means. So anything that kind of misses the perfection of love, that the actual behaviors of love is how we get the definition of sin. This is why God is not arbitrary in how he defined these sins. And so when you sin, you die. In Adam, people die, and in Adam there is death. This is what the book of Romans says, and he says that there is no sin in love. And so when these things that cause us to die, that cause us to die, is when we get cut. Like what happened when there was another one from right there when King Henry VIII, he was a Episcopal reformer. Mm-hmm. And he was the one who gave us Episcopalianism. When he confiscated all of the charities and stuff like that from all that church property. And one of the things that we found out later on was that the monks were on the verge of they had a working prototype of a blast furnace, that they had developed. And a blast furnace was the main invention that gave us the Industrial Revolution, because it gave us the ability to make really cheap, really good iron. And and that got confiscated and destroyed, in the 16th century, and we didn't get, and that was why the Industrial Revolution got pushed back another 250-ish years because of that. And so we didn't get the the Protestant Reformation, at least this particular reformer, King Henry VIII, not only did he step on all of the good works we were doing with our hospitals and our charities to take care of the poor the way Christ commanded us, he also stepped on the Industrial Revolution and set us back 250 years in scientific progress. And imagine if the Industrial Revolution had happened 500 years ago instead of 200 and 250-ish. This is a different planet. There's no World War I, no World War II. All of that stuff just doesn't happen. If King Henry VIII didn't confiscate the church's property and cut those institutions off from that love of the Holy Church.
Yeah, and you can look at the origins of these things. Do you want this charity that originated in love and seeing other human beings as fellow children of God, or Otto von Bismarck's plan to secure the Kaiser's rule in Germany or Prussia, where we get our modern welfare state? I love this Scalia quote. The transformation of charity into legal entitlement has produced donors without love and recipients without gratitude, which is the opposite of what you get when you go to the soup kitchens of Phoenix, or even UBS. UBS changed their name in Arizona, United Blood Services, very heavily Catholic influence. I don't think they're explicitly a Catholic organization. But yeah, this is one of those things that we just never stopped to appreciate or say, well, before we throw this thing in the trash, let's look at the origins. Because if we're sort of cutting it off at the waist, we might currently be reaping benefits that we're not appreciating the origin of. So it's this static thinking of let's have the same result but have a totally different origin. No. Once you change the origin, well, once you change the origin, you're not going to get the same result at all.
Exactly.
And again, they just didn't appreciate it. They were so quick to spit in the face of it.
And that's what's so much worse about it, is that, again, love creates this joy. It creates good things, and love is explicitly voluntary. You cannot force love. So this is like the idea that, hey, we're going to forcibly love our neighbors as ourselves. We're going to do that by force. Well, okay, what do we call forced love in English? Rape. It's like we don't quite have a word for it, but that's the closest one in English. And rape's an abomination. Conjures all these awful terms. This is how we should look at welfare. Because you're forcing people to kind of love their neighbors as themselves and to do the act, and that makes it an abomination. This is why you don't get the good society out of it. This is why things were so much better under the Catholic system, where you were told that, hey, we need to do this voluntarily because the Lord, like the Lord Jesus Christ says, if you love me, obey my commands. It's not obey my commands. It's only if you love me. And he's giving you the choice, the good and righteous King, King of Kings, Prince of the universe, all of that. Jesus Christ, he said, he's the voluntary King. He's King, and he's definitely King of Kings, Almighty God. But he gives you a choice. You don't have to if you don't want to. And granted, there's no good that comes of that. but but he does give you the choice one way or the other, and it's a very beautiful concept. And when you take that away and you try to do good by force, you cannot do good by force. It is physically impossible. It is definitionally sin, because love definitionally cannot be forced. And therefore, if you're so if you're always trying to do good forcibly, that is definitionally sin. Because it cannot be good. The only time you can use force is in justice, and that presumes sin. So you're allowed to use force against sin. There are restrictions to it, but I'm simplifying here. You're allowed to use force against sin, but sin presumes that something that's been done wrong first. This is why it's justice. It's always reactionary. It's always a second. You can't have pre-crime. Pre-crime is not okay. So this idea you're going to try to build a just society on an institution like the state, is definitionally inconsistent with at least Catholic teaching on morality. And we do get into I'm going to get into this like next week on my show, but of the Catholic Church's teaching on politics and stuff like that. But but this is definitionally sin. Like when you see like welfare, you need to be looking at this as like rape. Yeah, it's a forced love. We don't have a word for that in English, but the closest one is rape, and that's the idea it should be conjuring, because it is awful.
Chapter 10, The Church and Western Law. From page 193, he's discussing law as a coherent legal order whose structure was internally consistent. This is so it's not to be confused as a piece of legislation written by a politician. Quoting page 193, the key treatise of canon law was the work of the monk Gratian, called a concordance on discordant canons, written around 1140. It is an enormous work both in size and scope. It also constituted a historical milestone. According to Berman, it was, quote, the first comprehensive and systematic legal treatise in the history of the West, and perhaps the history of mankind, if by comprehensive is meant the attempt to embrace virtually the entire law of a given polity, and if by systematic is meant the express effort to present that law as a single body in which all of the parts are viewed as interacting to form a whole, which takes us far away from being able to arbitrarily dictate one thing and then, totally unrelated, we're going to mandate one thing and, by the way, make things voluntary in another sector. Mm-hmm. This allowed things to be complementary instead of antagonistic. He continues, the insistence upon consent as the foundation of marriage and upon wrongful intent as the basis of crime, the development of equity to protect the poor and helpless against the rich and powerful, he says, comes from this church and Western law. I'm sure the feminists really appreciate that. Here, mm-hmm. Berman writes, were the foundations not only of modern law of marriage, but also of certain basic elements of modern contract law, namely the concept of free will and related concepts of mistakes, duress, and fraud. Unbelievable chapter. Thoughts on chapter 10, the Church and Western Law?
Oh, yeah. And the basically this idea that there was going to be a one moral code for all was a very different concept than the one that preceded it, which was it was always based on the the authority of whatever religion or whatever god you were serving, and it was only for that region. Remember, people used to tie gods, kind of in an animism sort of way. Gods were tied to the land that their people had conquered. So, and they were not powerful outside of it. And that idea actually goes back good 5,000 years at least. But this idea that gods would war with each other and for land and territory, and this idea that you would have universal laws that was like, this is because I have a universal God who is God over everything, not just like God over one little place. And I, this is idea that where it came from, that we should have some sort of standard law for all people. This is where we got the canon laws from, because the church itself, because it hasn't been spread out for so long, when we finally got through all of that with that messenger system that the monasteries had talked about, we built that because communication systems had completely broken down across all of Rome. And the Rome had squandered so much wealth, and it was far too dangerous for one side of the empire to talk to the other. This was again partly what led to the schism with the Eastern Orthodox, because we couldn't talk to each other for 500 years. Kind of make so some things became very different, and we stopped reading each other, stopped communicating. And when the monks did all of this, they created this messenger system. It gave us this idea, okay, now we can standardize all of our laws, and we can this became canon law. This eventually became natural law, and that says it's said to apply everywhere. It doesn't matter if you're killing or murdering people is always wrong. It's that it's wrong whether you're in one country or another, and it doesn't matter if they're Christians or non-Christians. You're not allowed to murder them because that's a universal morality. And the idea that's connected now to the law this is where we get the idea of, hey, the law applies to everybody. It's not because it's from God, who is a universal God, not just a regional God. And this is. This is such a big thing that the Catholic Church brought to the world that was just completely different from the previous system.
Yeah, I spoke with a number of Christians and conservatives on Wake Up Tucson. This was a few days ago. I uploaded it to the Libertarian Institute YouTube channel. And that was one of the things I said is Commandment 6 is thou shalt not murder. There's no big asterisk for politicians or, well, unless you join a group and you guys put on uniforms, well, then murder doesn't count. Thou shalt not murder. No asterisk for members of NATO or members of the former Warsaw Pact.
Right
Same
there,
principle applies.
This is where the Catholics came up with the idea of a just war. The only kind of just war is a purely defensive war, and they would excommunicate. And then, as the international lawyer for all the kings, they would excommunicate kings for attacking, in an unprovoked way. If they're saying, "Hey, I was provoked," that was, okay, then you can argue about it. But if it was an unprovoked war, that guy was excommunicated, and it was a real deterrence to war. Didn't work all the time. We wish it did, but but this was a completely new thing that the only just war that a state can launch is a defensive war, and that was very different than the Roman thing where they had by the way, we got republics are usually blood-soaked monsters in all of history, far worse than monarchs. That's just their incentives. Rome had like 26 civil wars in their first 230 years. We got away with one because of Christianity. And by the way, that's just the civil wars. That doesn't count the external wars. so big difference.
On page 202, Wood stresses the importance of the deviation. So a lot of times people will hear, well, the thing about America is America had slavery. The thing about whites is they mistreated the native population. Yes, but again, that is not a unique characteristic. You're taking something that applies to all cultures, all races, both genders, and saying it uniquely applies when that's not what uniquely applies. That's not the deviation. So he discusses this deviation in Western law on page 202. Pope Innocent IV considered the question of whether fundamental rights of property and of establishing lawful governments belonged only to Christians or whether these things rightly belong to all men. At the time, an exaggerated pro-papalist opinion could be found in some circles, according to which the Pope, as God's representative on earth, was Lord of the whole world, and therefore that legitimate authority and ownership could be exercised only by those who recognize papal authority. Yes. Innocent rejected this position and instead held that, quote, ownership, possession, and jurisdiction can belong to infidels licitly, for these things were made not only for the faithful, but for every rational creature. Final thoughts on the church and Western law.
Yeah, and that was a huge innovation. Like this idea that people who were not a part of your religion needed to be afforded the same sort of human rights you had because you're all products of God. It's like God's the owner of all. So, and this is why when Jesus is going around the New Testament forgiving people's sins like it's nobody's business, no, he's right. It is nobody's business because all sins are all sins which are not love. They're actions against love. He is love. God is love. So therefore all actions are primarily offensive to him first, not to the people offended. And that's the thing about Christ is that he's forgiving people's sins without consulting the people who were like sinned against. And most of the time, it's like because the sin is primarily against him. So if you are sinning against people that God has created, it's not the other people's rights that you've violated. You have, but you have violated their rights, because God gave them to them. But the primary person you've sinned against is actually the Lord Almighty. So it's his property rights, so to speak, that you have violated. And you don't really want to get on the bad side of God because he really can enforce his property rights. So yes, you need to be affording the same rights to other people who are still created by God, even if they do not serve him.
Before getting into the text of chapter 11, the church and Western morality, I want to ask you a question, and you give me a Catholic reasonable justification for why you hold this position. You are pro-life. What does it mean to be pro-life?
To be pro-life is that you are supporting the right to life from natural birth to natural death. That nobody has the right to take away a life from another person. And the Catholic position on execution has kind of gone back and forth, but generally it's been held that we believe that the state does have this right, but should not exercise it unless they absolutely have to. And and to that point, most executions these days are not, do not fall into that category. It's a nuanced position in canon law, but for the most part, is that this is basically, in these days, it's basically unjustifiable. And but the state does have this right, but we believe they should not be using it. They should be respecting natural, all life, and being because this is something that God has created to give order to the universe. That God's primary act of order was creating life. Because what's it mean to be living? So you have metabolism, and that you are keeping order in and pushing chaos out. That you are beating entropy. And so that this act of creation, of ordering the universe, if you are killing it, you are in fact undoing God's creation, and that's why it's a sin against him. To love is to be productive. Again, it all goes back to how you view God. But yeah, that's this idea of pro-life, is that you're not allowed to undo God's creation. That not only is this human life is, and by the way, the only reason we're allowed to do it for medical research on animals or something like that is because humans create more order than animals. And so if we're using that animal in a way that's going to enhance our amount of our productivity, our ordering of the universe, which is more in line with God, that's the only reason it's only if this is going to do more than not doing it. So that's where animals actually get rights from, is that, because they have, they as living beings, or not beings, but living animals, living organisms, they're taking in, inanimate resources, metabolizing them into themselves and creating life, which is basically in the image of God. So if you're going to undo that, you better have something better to replace it with in human order. So if you cannot beat that bar, then you cannot touch that animal either. It's something that pro-life, it comes exactly, again, from our belief that God is love. And we're very specific about what we mean right there. It's not some throwaway line at all. It is fundamental to how we view reality, the substance of reality itself. But yeah.
So when you said that natural birth to natural death, where does that place, let's say, a fetus or a human being at the moment of conception before natural birth? Is that a life that you are justified in ending, or would you apply that same principle to a 5-year-old who can't take care of itself, to a 5-month-old who also cannot take care of itself?
Oh yeah, it's not just that it cannot take care of itself, but it is a grievous sin against love if you end that life. that from the moment of conception, it is something that will definitely produce more order than it discharges. Then it discharges entropy. So if you get rid of it, you have you have undone God's creation, and you have done something as a very the idea. Okay, and not only is it this is also where we get our concepts of justice from, because there are some like vices and stuff that Catholics do not believe that we do not believe that like prostitution or something like that should be criminalized. We do believe it's sin, and because to sin means you are not producing any new value, because love is always necessarily productive, and so if you're trading, but the reason is, okay, you're trading production for consumption. The female herself is what's being consumed. There's no actual new production there. So but the fact it's not, but the reason it's where we say that's a vice, and the difference between that and a violation is that when you have a violation of natural law, what that is that you actually decrease the amount of love in the system. You've decreased the amount of value there. So whereas when you're like with a vice, it's a zero-sum thing, it stays the same. But if value goes down, that's when we say that's a violation. That deserves that you have that's when you need to be this is when justice is merited. This is when force is merited. Because if you use force at all, that's going to be some chaos there. But the idea of restoring order is restoring justice. Justice is the restoration of the order that was lost to sin. And so if there's no, if all you're losing out to is entropy, like the zero sum, you're still losing to entropy. But so if you're still but it's very minor thing. So if you use force at all, you've made it worse. So this is the idea. Don't make the order worse. You can't use force against like prostitutes or something like that, because you will make things worse. And God's law requires that you make things better. You are here. You live in order to bring order to the universe. And so if you are, but if you decrease the amount of love in the system, love is order. The words are synonymous. And so if you decrease that amount, that is when force is necessary to stop that decrease. So if you are killing a human life, which is like the apex of life, this is the most possible order that is created. You have greatly decreased the amount of order in the system. You greatly decrease the amount of love in the system. This is when force can be used against you. Not just to prevent it, but to prevent it from happening again. Or to deter it. This is what makes some sins can be you can use force against them, whereas other sins you cannot. And it's a very, very big distinction. Sorry.
Chapter 11, the Church and Western Morality, Woods begins by saying many of the most important principles of the Western moral tradition derive from the distinctly Catholic idea of the sacredness of human life. So when someone says, well, fetuses are like the size of a grain of rice at some point, it is literally like saying, your friend is microscopically small compared to the statues on Easter Island. So kind of killing them. And also, if you zoom out on the world and then you just keep zooming out, the earth is like really teeny. So therefore, genocide is only killing some people on this really tiny world, as opposed to looking at them with, I don't want to say inherent value, because I know that'll kill the comment section with all the Austrians I have, but recognizing people as an end in and of themselves, as God's creation is so vitally
objective
important.
Truth. The idea that the idea of this is the only place that value itself is subjective. The rest of reality is not.
The only reason I didn't say objective is because you care more about your friends than you do about my friends, yet they're still human beings. So that would mean you have a different scale of values because you have a preference for them. But it's still this concept of the sacredness of human life. He says Catholics spoke out against and eventually abolished the practice of infanticide, which had been considered morally acceptable even in ancient Greece and Rome.
Question. Yeah, I from the Catholic perspective, it would be that, hey, God is love. He is the everlasting love. He does not change. I am who I am. It's the saying, I am present. I am omnipresent. I do not change. And so his love, there's obviously for us has value, but that value will never, ever change. That's about as close to intrinsic value as you can get. Something is intrinsically valued because God values it, and he does not change.
Yeah, this is the dumb primitive mindset you get when you don't have this beautiful architecture inspiring people to love life. They just become pessimistic. Oh, humans are changing the weather, and therefore, humans just need to go. The planet would be better without us.
I mean, it's an empty and joyless sort of existence. It's like, imagine that you live your life without love. Sure, you have a right to, but like, where's the beauty in it? What's the point? I mean, you get the artwork that we have today, which is so depressing and chaotic, and like, why would you it's like, this is where that comes from. And so it's like, but don't you want things that are beautiful? If not, it's like, ugh.
Well, what's the point? Yeah. Page 206, he discusses suicide. In the City of God, St. Augustine dismissed the elements of pagan antiquity and portrayed suicide as somehow noble. He says, greatness of spirit is not the right term to apply to one who has killed himself because he has lacked strength to endure hardships or another's wrongdoing. In fact, we detect weakness in the mind which cannot bear physical oppression or the stupid opinion of the mob. We rightly ascribe greatness to the spirit that has the strength to endure a life of misery instead of running away from it, and to despise the judgment of men in comparison with the pure light of a good conscience. He then quotes Thomas Aquinas in Summa Theologiae. Life is a gift divinely given to man and subject to the power that gives life and takes it away. Therefore, one who takes his own life sins against God, much as one who kills another servant sins against the master whose servant it was, or as one sins who usurps judgment in a matter not in his jurisdiction. He then goes into the abolition of gladiatorial contests, which such trivialization of human life could not have been more at odds with the Catholic emphasis on the dignity and worth of each individual. God, I love that chapter.
Yeah. It gives you such a richness to the libertarian point of view, that if you don't have that as like a backdrop, it becomes so sterile. Like your beliefs become so sterile without this backdrop of the idea of inherent human worth because of the love of God, and that the love just gives these ideas beauty, that they did not have.
He then, on page 213, says, it was precisely in order to counter that kind of thinking that the just war tradition, and particularly the contributions of the 16th century scholastics, developed in the first place. According to the Catholic Church, no one, not even the state, was exempt from the demands of morality. If one's guiding principle is to do whatever brings immediate pleasure, one is, in a sense, no different from a beast. Ending the chapter, he says, we are not only not to commit adultery, but we are also not to entertain impure thoughts, for to do so turns one of our fellow human beings into a thing, a mere object. Essentially, this: you can aspire to be one of these men, a builder of civilization, a great genius, a servant of God and men, or a heroic missionary, or you can be a self-absorbed nobody fixated on gratifying your appetites.
Final like the Twitter comment section.
I know.
It's basically saying you can be this good person who aspires to everything, or you can be on social media. Yeah. But yeah, it's it's just this beautiful idea that like this is where it comes from. This is something so new. This did not exist, 1,500 years ago when we really started this mission, and at the end of Rome, and this idea that every human has worth, that life itself has inherent worth that cannot be violated because, God is the everlasting God. He does not change, and his value for us is constant and constant and true. And and that it applies to everything. We are not to undo God's creation. That it's like you do not own yourself. God does. It's like it is his rights that are offended when you kill yourself. It is that it is God that you primarily sin against. This is why God can forgive those sins. It's because his rights are the ones that are primarily violated. This is why Christ can basically bring forgiveness to the whole world. I mean, this is the Catholic worldview. It's just all layered and layered with networks of connections and beauty.
In the conclusion chapter, A World Without God, he more or less restates his thesis. I like how he ends it. He says, he quotes a French philosopher, Simone Weil. I am not a Catholic, but I consider the Christian idea, which has its root in Greek thought, and in the course of the centuries has nourished all of our European civilization, as something that one cannot renounce without becoming degraded. Wood says, that is a lesson that Western civilization, cut off more and more from its Catholic foundations, is in the process of learning the hard way. Favorite thing about the book and your conclusion?
Yeah, this sounds like a Malice's question. What was your favorite? Are you going to tell me you are welcome at the end of this?
No, I won't.
I'm kidding.
He'll IP claim me, if anyone will. He'll hire Cancella to take me down.
Oh, for sure. And anyway, so yeah, my favorite part of this book really was, how we saved, not just how we saved civilization from ruin, but how we built this thing from the ground up, and just what, how far back and screwed we were, before the Catholic Church came around and started making changes. And how it was our way that convinced the whole world to adopt it. It was like this. I like what Matt Erickson usually says a lot, that not only is the is everything people who live today, are they all lowercase? They're basically all lowercase c Christians because they de facto accept all of the Christian ways that were invented by Christianity and primarily by the Catholic Church. So when I look at an atheist, I see a lowercase c Catholic. Yeah, because they effectively are. It's like the whole world has been like completely revolutionized by the Catholic Church. Primarily the Catholic one, not just Christianity itself. The Catholic version of Christianity is what basically everybody is today. If you are a capitalist nation, you are de facto lowercase c Catholic, because that is based on our concept of love. By the way, corporations, which themselves, which are the image of love, that this reciprocated idea of love, that hey, you have three groups like the Holy Trinity, that the lover, the beloved, and the bond of love itself. You have the shareholders, the management, and the customers, who are all voluntarily exchanging with each other through the medium of the management. The people are exchanging value for. The customers are exchanging value with the management. The management is exchanging value with each of the others, and with the other two groups, and therefore acting as that medium. Therefore, the third, the shareholders and the customers are also exchanging that value. This is the image of Trinitarian love, according to the specifically Catholic understanding of it. And so if you are a capitalist nation today, you are a lowercase c Catholic, because you are behaving our idea of the image of God. Is that you are supposed to be here to and basically profit is the physical manifestation of that. That this is a explicitly Catholic idea, and it was invented by the Catholic Church. Well, invented by God, but hey, we're the ones who spread it to the entire planet, and that did not happen under anybody else. And by the way, with the corporations, I forgot to say that it was invented by a Catholic king. So when I say, corporations are monarchy, what I'm saying is God is king. That God, the Holy Trinity, is King of Kings, and that love is monarchical. So like love is monarchy, God, and so this idea that corporations are, they were invented by a Catholic king, not at all a coincidence, and that these are the engines of value creation that they are today. Like all capitalism is run on the corporation, both of which are mirror images of godly love, of this reciprocated agape love.
Now, a lot of people will sort of mock the idea of tradition, which Catholics tend to greatly appreciate, along with Orthodox Christians. This is really having an appreciation, a default appreciation for your ancestors, whereas today the default is our ancestors were a bunch of dumb, primitive idiots. They were racist, genocidal morons, more or less bumping into things. So whereas the Catholic will really appreciate this. Dr. Matthew Raphael Johnson has been on this show twice, and I know he's an Orthodox, but he has a great quote on the importance of tradition, which the Catholics have really embraced, and everyone else needs to get on board with this. Dr. Johnson says, to stress to the point of obsession of the social sciences on quantitative data is a distortion of social life. It is a distortion because no single human being acts in a society purely on the basis of a rationale as defined by social science and quantitative analysis. Social life is not amendable in its fullness to quantification, to being reduced to a series of measures, numbers, or reference points. Human beings rather utilize a store of sentiment, emotion, and feeling, and much else along with purely disembodied rational thought in their everyday life. Much of these emotions, ideally speaking, come in the form of tradition or custom. So this, again, just beautifully summarizes the importance of tradition and the ability to communicate things that you might not be able to articulate because you didn't have the information in the past. And it's sort of gone through this practice or this trial and error process of what worked, what allowed the species to exist, what allowed them to have kids in the future, that so many people just throw away, whether it's the concept of prayer, the concept of going to church, the embracing of family. Oh, those are just people who they're morons who just happen to come out of the same womb I did. Screw them. That is just so spitting in the face of all this effort that people have put into the world. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it spits in the idea, again, that love is necessarily productive, that, it's productive of good things. Therefore, logically, if it works, it is somehow related to love. And so that basically, because all value is created through love, therefore, all good things are created through love. In love, there is no sin. It says that in Romans. So basically, this idea that authority is something bad. Well, the problem is that everything is based that, all value is basically based on authority. But again, it's the authority of God because love is authoritative. This is why you as a parent have a right over your kids, is because you love them. If you don't love your kids, and that means you're not doing good to them, that is why you lose that right, that your rights, to not just to that your rights over property are founded on love, that human rights come from love. That not from the self, but from the love, and that requires a self, but it is from love that rights are conferred. This is why God gives us the commandments that you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Second greatest commandment, second only to love God, who is love. So you need to love the idea of love and then love your neighbor as yourself. And this is where all of human morality and human rights come from. And so this idea that, because love requires authority, because it requires a person, love has to be founded in truth, or it's not love, it's a lie. Not only does, but love also confers truth because, we believe in divine revelation. God sends truth to us. Therefore, love is revelatory. You see this a lot in, when people, when men have children, they all of a sudden their priorities shift into place, and they're like, oh, really? my whole view of reality is now far better before. And now I really understand what's important and what's not. And God, how did I was just like a Neanderthal before, and I didn't know anything. That love itself transfers knowledge to you that you did not have before through revelation. And it brings your mind closer to how reality actually is. And so when you are not grateful to your ancestors who built this civilization, like you have, again, I can tell you're historically illiterate. You know nothing about, and the more you know about how bad it used to be, like your life would be hell, compared to what it is. You think your life is bad right now? You better be grateful to your ancestors that they decided to listen to the Catholic Church, defer gratification, store up their treasures in heaven, quote, which in practice means handing them off to your children. Because you didn't consume them in a hedonistic lifestyle, because the church teaches you against that. That means there's going to be excess. That means there's going to be savings. Those savings can compound in interest across time, and eventually, whereas in like 500 AD, we used to brush our teeth with urine because that urine has ammonia in it. This is a bleaching agent. So we went from brushing our teeth with urine to talking over Skype right now in 1500 years because of the Catholic Church. It's in our view of love, that is transformative. And again, love should transform you into a better person, just as it transformed human civilization from like a hell on earth to today, which is way better. We got problems. We still got a lot of problems with a lot of people not loving their neighbors and themselves. It's like we're working on it. This does not come naturally to humans, but it's a work in progress. And we're gonna make prior. We had this problem with the Reformation, which botched the definition of love because it puts too much of an emphasis on the self and not nearly enough of an emphasis on the community. It's not just your relationship with God. The two greatest commandments, there's two of them. It's like, it's not just that you have a personal relationship with God, it's that you have a relationship of love with your neighbors as well. And that's the holistic view that the Catholics have, whereas that would be the difference between the Protestants and the Catholics, is they have a different view of love because of that emphasis on the self as the arbiter of truth. That you've that in this way you've destroyed authority. You've made yourself the authority of truth. And you said love has to be in communion with me, not that I have to be in communion with love. So that's the perversion right there that Martin Luther unintentionally introduced. That his definition of love is necessarily different than the Catholic version of love. Whereas when you love God, who is external to you, and you love your neighbor who is external to you. This is what makes you in keeping with truth. This is the revelation that you get, the revelation of truth that comes from love. Whereas his, for Luther, his definition came from the self, that truth has to come from the self. So reality needs to move to me, not I need to move to reality. And you see this again played out in the progressives where they say, my truth, my value. And, it's like, and we presuppose that, the world is racist and all of that because that's my lived experience and my truth. And, this is the nonsense you get when you make the person the arbiter of truth rather than the relationship to other people. And so this idea that, again, what God you worship, this is why I say all heresies, they start with not understanding love. Every last one of them. It starts with not understanding love. If you get something wrong, that is where sin comes from. Again, it's a nice parallel there that that this Catholic idea of love, because it is actually perfect. This is the perfect definition of love that works. That's something that does. Again, how do you know love is good? You know it by its fruits. You will know a tree by its fruits. The good Lord says you will know good trees and bad trees by their fruit. Good trees produce good fruit. Good love produces good results. And like all of civilization. Every good thing about civilization was produced by this Catholic idea of love that we do not share with any other religion. And so that when things go wrong, they are symptoms of broken love, sin, as it's so called. And so this is why God says that you shall love your neighbor as yourself. This is the essence of human civilization, that this is the demarcation between we lived as basically savages, brushing our teeth with urine, and now we talk to each other on Skype. It's like this is the single difference is this Catholic understanding that God is love and love works this particular way, and we do not share that with any other religion on earth. And this is the single idea that is at the root of Western civilization and why it was better, much, much better.
This episode is in loving memory of Edward Andrew McHale, December 10th, 1979 to January 16th of 2022. I just want to read something that was on the back of the beautiful card that they handed out at his funeral. It says, "The measure of a man, not how did he die, but how did he live? Not what did he gain, but what did he give? Not what was his station, but had he a heart? And how did he play his God-given part? Not what was his shrine, nor what was his creed, but had he befriended those really in need? Not what did the piece in the newspaper say, but how many were sorry when he passed away? Was he ever ready with a word or a good cheer to bring back a smile, to banish a tear? These are the units to measure the worth of a man as a man, regardless of birth." The book is How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization by Thomas E. Woods Jr. Andrew, thank you so much for your time, brother.
Keith, thank you for having me on. I've loved talking about this book.
What is the most underappreciated contribution of the Catholic Church to Western civilization?
Oh, geez. All right. Well, this is just for people who might not know, this is a reference to my book, How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization, and it's organized in a series of chapters. So I'll talk about science. Science is the longest chapter because everybody thinks, well, the church hated science because they just want people to be stupid and ignorant, to keep putting the money in the collection plate and all that. I know that. And that was the conventional wisdom through the Enlightenment. That was why Voltaire was so unhappy, at least one reason. Then it was the conventional wisdom up through the late 19th century, when the president of Cornell wrote a 2-volume history on the alleged warfare between science and theology. That was Andrew Dixon White, Cornell. That was the conventional wisdom. That's not the conventional wisdom anymore. As of the 1950s, real historians of science do not believe that anymore. And if you don't believe me, there's a company called The Great Courses, and they sell courses taught by some of the top professors. Now, they are as plain vanilla as can be because they don't want to offend anybody. And because they're not libertarian, they're not conservative, they're not liberal, they just want to sell courses. So I took their history of science course just because I needed to see, what is the guy saying? And sure enough, even there, when they're being as vanilla and inoffensive as possible, even they are saying, yeah, we've long since moved this past the simplistic, the church hated science sort of thing, that we don't buy into that anymore. It's a much more interesting and complicated story, and I tell that in my book. So I guess I'll just stop there, but the book talks about international law, which, by the way, international law does not have to mean the United Nations. It simply has to mean an understanding that there are certain general principles that apply not just to your enemy, but to you too. That all peoples, in order to be moral, have to subject themselves to. Things like that. Also, our current understanding of charity, that when you help somebody, you help them without expectation of reciprocity. Or you make a donation, you don't necessarily do it to get your name on the building. This would have been thought of as unthinkable and inexplicable in ancient Greece or Rome. So there are a lot of things that we just are not aware of that we've inherited, whether we like it or not, from the church.